In a few moments, I will be talking about the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, the sportsmanship, the spirit of competition. But how about the inhumane treatment of the Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and the Christians, surveillance of the U.S. athletes, and more? Sounds like fun. Let's go. This is Stephanie, and this is Truth Detective. Did you know that I am your very own Truth Detective, giving you the evidence and investigating and giving you the facts on U.S. news, world news, culture, society, corruption, our justice system, and just about anything else that you want to know about. If you are a first-time listener here at Truth Detective, I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you enjoy this episode and continue to listen to all of my episodes. I don't think that I have to be way out there to say that we all love the Winter Olympics, right? Well, I always have. And February 4th is not that long away, and they are starting in Beijing, China. Yep, the Olympic Games are being held this year in the communist country of China, the CCP. But what about the newly spread Omicron variant of COVID that has infiltrated Beijing, where the Olympics will be held? Chinese officials downplay the virus and give false numbers of those infected in Beijing just to look good, so they will continue to have the Olympics there. And how about those cautious warnings that the U.S. has given those athletes to tell them that they can go and compete? We are finally making our way out of a heck of a year with COVID. Do we dare send our athletic citizens to a country where the virus has had an alarming Omicron outbreak? And yes, I know what you're going to say. Americans are free to do as they wish and have personal responsibility for their own well-being. And that's so true. So go they might. Yes, China is having a health situation, but that's not the only concern. Oh yes, China has its ways. Here's an article to solidify the cagey situation to make China look better to Americans. From Business Insider, there's this. To get U.S. influencers to share positive social media posts to boost the country's image ahead of the 2022 Winter Olympics. It says here, Chinese officials have hired a U.S.-based media firm to help promote China and the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Vippi Media signed a $300,000 deal to employ influencers to create content across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch. The contract comes amid complicated bilateral relations between the U.S. and China over human rights issues. And there are quite a few human rights issues. The agreement, registered with the U.S. Department of Justice, began in November and runs through March of 2022, when the Winter Paralympics ends. The contract comes as President Joe Biden and the officials in Great Britain, Canada, and Australia declared a diplomatic boycott of the Games in December to denounce China's record of human rights abuses, including the treatment of its Uyghur population of Turkic Muslims and the handling of tennis star Peng Shuai's accusations of sexual assault against a high-ranking Chinese official. China continues to deny allegations of human rights abuses in its territories, and people have expressed concerns about the safety of U.S. athletes competing in the Games. Human rights organizations warned athletes they could face punishment for speaking out against the government while in China. Continuing with the same article in Business Insider, Rob Kohler has said, there's really not much protection that we believe is going to be afforded to athletes. We're advising the athletes not to speak up. We want them to compete and use their voice when they get home. Well, that would sure convince me not to go. But on the other hand, these athletes have been training for so long, and they want their time to perform their sport. And now it is time that I talk about a similar event that happened way back in 1936. Do we not go there? Oh, we shall. It harkens back to a dark time in world history that we might not want to remember, but remember we must. History is so important because we can and do, for the most part, learn from the mistakes we made. And if we're not careful, history will repeat itself. On the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum website, there's this. The 1936 Summer Olympic Games were held in Berlin, Germany. For 2 weeks, Adolf Hitler camouflaged his anti-Semitic agenda while hosting the Games, hoping to impress the many foreign visitors who were in Germany for the Games. Hitler authorized a brief relaxation in anti-Jewish activities, including the removal of signs barring Jews from public places. The Games were a resounding propaganda success for the Nazis. They presented foreign spectators with the image of a peaceful and tolerant Germany. Yes, headed by Germany's #1 host, Hitler, who paused to accept a floral tribute amid the reverberating roar of the crowd. In the ceremonial parade which followed, America's standard passes proudly in review at the head of Uncle Sam's formidable team, 379 strong, a display which draws an Olympic salute. And still they came, 53 nations in all. But lest we forget, and may we always remember, there were countries that boycotted the Olympics that year. Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Netherlands, Cambodia, Spain, Switzerland, and the People's Republic of China. Germany skillfully promoted the Olympics with colorful posters and magazine spreads. Athletic imagery drew a link between Nazi Germany and ancient Greece, symbolizing the Nazi racial myth that a superior German civilization was the rightful heir of an Aryan culture of classical antiquity. This vision of classical antiquity emphasized ideal Aryan racial types, heroic, blue-eyed blondes with finely chiseled features. As post-Games reports were filed, Hitler pressed on with grandiose plans for German expansion. Persecution of Jews resumed after the Games were over. 2 days after the Olympics, Captain Wolfgang Früstner, head of the Olympic Village, killed himself when he was dismissed from military service because of his Jewish ancestry. On the Real Clear Politics website, there's this. Hitler in the Berlin Olympics of 1936 was trying, it was said, to prove the racial superiority of the Aryan race. This was self-evidently nonsense, as Jesse Owens and his American teammates demonstrated. But Germany still won the most gold medals and most medals overall, and Adolf Hitler used the Games to demonstrate both to the world and those within Germany the Nazis' commitment to building a new world order. So why is this piece of historical information important to never forget? Why do an episode on the Berlin Summer Olympics of 1936 and the Beijing Winter Olympics that's happening in a couple of weeks? Well, maybe this episode isn't really all about the Olympics. It's to bring an awareness of the mistreatment of certain, but not all, people of China. Perhaps this episode is to make us all feel that we do care and we all are humanitarian and have love in our hearts. And it seems, I remember prior to COVID lockdowns, when Americans used to feel more empathetic and civil to the plight of others. Yes, we need that more now than ever before. To stop looking down at our feet, ignoring the world around us, and start looking around to see what's going on in the world around us. Let's see. At the time in Germany, there was persecution of Jews, and countries were doubling down on not supporting the Olympics that were in a country that had such a huge hatred of one race as well as other non-Aryan races. And now, most of us hope we are better, more educated, more civilized than we were in 1936. We can now see what happens when a nation declares war on its own citizens, much like current-day China does. Or do we see that? Do we see that nothing good comes from encouraging and doing business with a country that supports the declaration of war on their own citizens? Torture, killing, organ harvesting, internment, re-education camps they are called, forced labor, child labor, and sterilization. These are hard topics to wrap our heads around and understand because we Americans don't experience it. Thank goodness. But I am going to tell you that I believe everything has to do with everything, and some officials can't and won't readily admit that fact. Here, right now, we are faced with a situation, and it doesn't have to be problematic at all. Does America support the Winter Olympics, or do we take a stand on the genocide of many religious groups that are certainly there? If you don't know, you don't. The mainstream media keeps this a secret, so you wouldn't know anything was going on. On the surface, it doesn't even seem to be a problem for Americans, mainly because we don't see what is happening. Media coverage doesn't report any conflict of interest upon having an Olympic game in Beijing, China. We only hear about the conflict on certain news outlets and podcasts that will make you aware of all the atrocities happening in China. Why would the United States ever support going to the 2022 Winter Olympic Games when China has created such tragic, horrific, and despicable atrocities on their own citizens, not to mention the world? Have we learned nothing? Has humanity gone out the window? Do we no longer care about others and wish them ill will? Is China and leader Xi Jinping a similar country to Germany? Are these two countries committing atrocities to their citizens with political persecution? Let's whittle and drill down on this. There are so many humanitarian issues to be concerned about. There's no doubt. You may not think that these issues even affect you, but it does. They do. Even though you may not see the individuals that are directly affected, you can bet that these individuals wish that they had a voice and someone who would speak for them. Stand up for them and believe that there is a better way for them to live. Listen here to the words of Chamith from the All In podcast as he tells us how he really feels about the persecution of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in northwest China. Here we go.
Yeah, nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs, okay? You bring it up because you really care, and I think that's nice that you care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a very hard...
Wait, you're saying you personally don't care?
I'm telling you a very hard, ugly truth, okay? Of all the things that I care about, yes, it is below my line.
Well, this kind of thing just makes me sad and mad that an American, with all his rights and privileges and his freedoms, would say such a thing. On the Real Clear Politics website, I found this article entitled, Boycott the Beijing Olympics. Not such a bad idea. The Chinese Communist Party of today has mastered the political repression of the Chinese people with its social credit scoring and has focused its punishments on those that are either not ethnically Chinese, such as the Muslim Uyghurs we were just talking about, or are politically isolated, such as the Falun Gong practitioners, or are politically dangerous, such as the growing Christian population. Their harsh mistreatment is a warning to the rest of the Chinese population to behave. And recently, the news has reported what has happened to the 12 million Uyghurs who live in the Xinjiang province, and it is especially gruesome. The Uyghurs are ethnically of Turkic descent and practice Islam. Today, up to 3 million of them are believed to be confined to internment camps that are vocational training camps, where torture and hard labor awaits. Learning Chinese, customs, culture, and the language is not an option. The grisliest fate is forced sterilization and some other really atrocious crimes in which Uyghurs are killed so their bodies can be cannibalized for sale on a global market operated by the government. And lastly, in the American military news, here's another article entitled French Parliament Calls Uyghur Persecution a Genocide. And in the article, it has an important subheading, The Correct Side of History. Yes, absolutely yes. I absolutely know that I want to be on the correct side of history. The Chinese government has denied reports of violence and said the camps are meant to prevent religious extremism. Well, now on to another atrocity. How about the practice of Falun Gong in China? A year ago, I did an episode on the Falun Gong practitioners in China who are being imprisoned and tortured, sometimes for many, many years, for having a strong belief in Falun Gong and not renouncing their faith and beliefs. Organ harvesting is what awaits those that qualify as healthy enough to have the surgery. The others that are not, they live a horrible life and experience a tragic death. Falun Gong is a peaceful, mindful practice that has brought health and abundant happiness to its practitioners. This is a meditative and spiritual practice that was at one time recognized and accepted in China. In the Epoch Times, there is an article entitled Beijing Sentences Falun Gong Practitioner to 8 years in prison ahead of Olympic Games. The heavy-handed sentence again spotlights the Chinese Communist Party's human rights violations as the regime seeks to exalt its political image during the upcoming Games. The International Olympic Committee should open its eyes to the current situation of human rights in China under the Chinese Communist Party and should not continue to cooperate with it. This is a shame for the International Olympic Committee. As the story is told in the Epoch Times, Zhu Na, a 53-year-old still life painter from Beijing, is one of the 11 Chinese citizens who were detained in July 2020 for providing photos and information to the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times during the early COVID-19 outbreak in China. All of them are Falun Gong practitioners. Falun Gong is a spiritual discipline based on the core tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and about 70 million to 100 million people were practicing it in China in 1999. At that time, the Chinese regime deemed the practice popularity a threat and launched a nationwide persecution campaign to eradicate it. This atrocity is still going on to this day. To find out more about this atrocity, my episode on the practice of Falun Gong is on truthdetectivepodcast.com, and it is exactly a year to the day last year that I did that episode. And now how about I highlight something that many people don't know goes on in China, the persecution of Christians in China. Although many individuals from Western countries know nothing about this, it's worth knowing about. Churches of many groups have been hiding out underground in China, holding gatherings, services, and meetings, hoping that they will not be discovered and become the next casualty. To be raided and have worshippers of any religious belief fall into the hands of the atheist CCP government would be horrific for these believers. Tortured to renounce their faith is the least of what is waiting for them if they are discovered. In a Time article, it says here, the Chinese Communist Party feels threatened by the rapid spread of Christianity in the country, especially from churches that operate outside of the government's rules. Even in official churches that have government permission to organize, CCTV cameras and other surveillance equipment are installed in every church so that the state knows what the pastor or the priest might be talking about in their sermons. This will indeed open Chinese pastors and other clergymen up to torture and other tragedies if they say something against the CCP. We generally hear about the CCP's underhanded secret business dealings that are hurting many areas politically and economically between America and China. Do we accept or reject these horrific atrocities on the Chinese people? Do we? Some might say that if China wants to do business with Western countries, then they must stop these horrific and tragic practices now. But still, they don't. And here's something a little more alarming. On the Verge website, I found this. U.S. athletes told to use burner phones at Beijing Winter Olympics over concerns of surveillance and malicious software. The United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee is telling athletes to ditch their personal phones for burners ahead of next month's Winter Olympics in China, according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. The advisory was reportedly sent out twice last year to warn athletes about the possibility of digital surveillance while in China. Every device communication, transaction, and online activity may be monitored. Your devices may also be compromised with malicious software, which could negatively impact future use, as noted by the Wall Street Journal, as well as the countries of Great Britain, Canada, and the Netherlands. Yep, the United States is strongly advising not to bring their personal electronics into the country. And the CCP has recently said that there is an app that all the athletes must download before they can enter China. China will always do what it must do, be a communist dictatorship, a government that the world cannot trust, and one where its citizens have no hope of a life that is better than what is given to them from birth. And so I'm going to tell you why we ought to care. Because we are human. We are humanitarians. We all must be aware of evil and call it out when we see it or hear it. It's good to live peacefully amongst others. We don't like to see others suffer. We don't want individuals to be physically harmed. Hopefully, others don't want to see us suffer or be physically harmed, and they will help us if need be. We would want someone to help us if we needed them to. We all have our own belief system, our own mind. No one ought to take that away from us. Remember, you won't be able to turn a blind eye for long. Once you know these atrocities, these horrific details that you know now, you won't forget them. And that's when you question everything and start to take action. So what are my key takeaways for this episode? Well, the first thing, go to genocidegames.org to see all you can do to take action now to save our Olympic athletes. Stop the genocide games. Petition, events, and the steps you can take to protect our athletes are all laid out and ready to go with your help. Cancel culture works both ways. Cancel the Beijing Winter Olympics 2022 by not giving them airtime in your household. This is one way to send a strong message to our administration, the media, and China. There is a link to an article I will include in the show notes that lists all the programs that you can stream instead of the Olympics. Stop buying made-in-China products. Did you know that almost everything you have in your house is made in China? It's true. Nike products, TVs, phones, computers, electronics, toys, furniture, everyday essential items like garbage cans, utensils, headphones, water bottles, candles, etc., etc. The list goes on. Rather buy made-in-America products. This may be difficult and cumbersome at first, but we must stand on our humanitarian principles that make America great by letting it be known that these genocidal practices in China will no longer be accepted or allowed. Openly talk about this topic and share this episode with friends and family, as well as the links I have provided in the show notes. Already, NBC and ESPN have decided not to send reporters to the Olympics. There will be others to follow. Quietly, ask yourself why that is. And lastly, something that you must do. Go to Getter, Gettr. You can register without exposing your true name if you feel more comfortable. Open the conversation without fear of being censored or canceled for your beliefs. At the very least, check it out. I know this episode has been a little heavy and a lot of information, so I want you right now to go sit down with your favorite drink, relax, and think about everything that's been presented here to you in this episode. If you have any questions, debates, or anything else that you want to tell me, future topics, or just to say hello, you can email me, truthdetectivepodcast@gmail.com. I'm there, and I always respond. Go to truthdetectivepodcast.com to get to this episode so that you can share it. All of my episodes are there with the show notes and the links that I mentioned in those episodes. You can also subscribe or follow Truth Detective Podcast, and that way you will get the notifications of when new episodes come out. And what is better than that? I will see you next time on Truth Detective. Okay, bye-bye.